I don't know. I think it's something different. I blame Mossy Oak Bottomland. That's when it all went sideways. Turkey hunters treat opinions like religions, right? Turkey hunters are rabid. Now, not to say that whitetail hunters aren't, but for whatever reason, it seems to me that turkey hunters are on another level.
So you're saying that turkey hunters are opinionated? No, shut up. Shut up.
Goblin's down, so turkeys are down. True or false?
False. Not necessarily.
We've got 30,000 acres just proposed in the last 2 months of being developed and putting track houses in. I mean, that's current turkey population right now. That's their habitat, and it's going to be developed. And so what do you do about it? Welcome back to the Saltlick Sessions podcast. Today, we've got Dr. Mike Chamberlain in the house, a.k.a. the Wild Turkey Doc, and if you care at all about turkeys, habitat, or what's actually driving population changes, this is the guy. Years of research, boots on the ground data, and zero patience for the internet myths. We're breaking down what's real, what's not, and what actually matters moving forward. We've also got Captain Mike Murray back on the show, bringing you real world, no BS perspective alongside Oscar Maldonado, who somehow shows up to every hunt like he's just here for the snacks, but still ends up in the middle of everything. So now you've got science and experience colliding in one conversation. This one's not just talk, it's clarity. Let's dive into it. With that said, Dr. Chamberlain, welcome to the Saltlick Sessions podcast. Thanks a bunch for jumping on with us. Welcome to Saltlick Worldwide Podcast, your ultimate destination for hunting, fishing, conservation, and gear. From international hotspots to the backwoods of America, we bring you the real stories, raw opinions, and the conversations others won't have. Buckle up. The adventure starts now. You know, people call you the Wild Turkey Doctor. You know, who are you? What do you do? And, you know, what are you chasing right now?
Yeah, so I'm a wildlife researcher at the University of Georgia, and what I do for a living is I design and implement applied field studies, often involving turkey capture and or other techniques used to study whether it be movements or gobbling behavior or genetics or disease, you name it. And I mentor graduate students and field staff to do that work. And then I get paid to try to explain what the science means to turkey hunters and other people that care about the bird and natural resources.
The UGA directory has you listed as the NWTF Distinguished Professor affiliation. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Just yesterday, that position was elevated to an endowed chair position, and what that means is, so NWTF, National Wild Turkey Federation, they partnered with the University of Georgia a couple years ago to endow my faculty position, meaning, you know, an endowment was created that I don't get the money. It doesn't come to my salary or anything. It goes into a pot of money that grows, and I'm able to tap into that pot of money to support my research. And so the idea up front was to get that established. That was the distinguished professor position. It's the first of its kind ever that's focused solely on wild turkey research. And then over the last year or so, we've been trying to grow that to $1 million. At that point, it becomes an endowed chair position. Again, the first endowed chair position ever created, focused solely on turkeys. And now, as the endowment grows, it allows me the flexibility to pay other researchers like postdoctoral researchers and staff members who I can mentor. And the reason for that endowment was quite simple, and that is I can see the end of my career down in front of me, and I know that when I leave, or when I was going to leave and retire, that the university was unlikely to fill my position with someone like me that is dedicated to focusing research on this bird and then communicating it to the public. And so I have worked for a number of years to try to get an endowment started. This opportunity came about, and now it ensures that in perpetuity there's going to be a person at the University of Georgia that studies wild turkeys, and that's something I'm very proud of.
What is, we see these things on the internet all the time, and for whatever reason, turkey hunters treat opinions like religions, right? Turkey hunters are rabid. Now, not to say that whitetail hunters aren't, but for whatever reason, it seems to me that turkey hunters are on another level. Why do you think, in my opinion anyway, I think turkey hunting is the most emotional niche anyway when it comes to chasing these North American species. What's your thought about that?
So you're saying that turkey hunters are opinionated? No, shut up. Shut up.
Read between the line.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's because, and I agree with you. I also think that turkey hunters, of all the hunters I've ever interacted with, are the most passionate about what they do, and they're the most cerebral in how they do it. They think very critically about how they're hunting, what they're doing. And I think it's because turkey hunting is such a one-on-one type of activity that is engaging. You're communicating with with the quarry. Um, you get your ass kicked a lot, and it becomes a challenge, and it becomes personal in many ways. And I think that transcends into a body of hunters who are incredibly passionate to the point of being fanatical about what they do. And that's cool, I think. But to your point, it does result in some interesting conversations because people that are that passionate about what they do are often uh, freely willing to share their thoughts, if you will.
We had Dr. Marcus Lashley from UF on week and a half ago now, and one thing that came up in the comments, especially after we posted the podcast and a lot of the shorts, is that these guys are everybody. It seemed like the majority of the comments for Dr. Lashley and in general about turkeys was that everybody feels like turkey season starts too late, and by the time it opens, now with the exception of youth season, that the turkeys are already done gobbling by then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that part of that is, as hunters, we think that when turkeys start gobbling, we should be hunting. And in the turkey mating world, the mating system of this bird, toms are supposed to start gobbling many weeks in advance of breeding activities occurring. And so you kind of have to understand that biologically, turkeys are wired for toms to start displaying and gobbling as winter flocks are splitting up and transitioning into these spring breeding groups that we see now. So they've been acting this way for weeks, but hens are on a different playing field when it comes to actually being receptive to breeding and then timing their reproduction, which is incredibly consistent from one year to the next. And I post about this every year on my socials, showing data that when you look at nesting activity, it's very, very consistent from one year to the next, regardless of how early the spring is or how warm temperatures in March translate to toms acting foolish. We see that and we think we're supposed to be in the woods hunting when in reality, it's just a part of their natural mating system that has been at play for eons. And it's just, it's human nature to want to be out there. I mean, right? We're hunters. We want to hunt. We want to be afield when the bird is acting a certain way. And I get it. I'm a turkey hunter. I understand. But a question is often asked is, like, okay, why are seasons timed the way they are? And if you are as old as I am, and you can look back during the days when we were trying to restore wild turkeys, we didn't have, I mean, there were not even hunting seasons in some states, in some places. There were no spring seasons when I was a child in some states. And the reason for that is we were trying to restore turkeys and their populations were expanding and growing. and states started implementing hunting seasons to allow us all the opportunity to hunt. And what happened through time was, as we got more and more opportunity and populations were expanding, states were getting political pressure to open seasons earlier and earlier and earlier so that we would have opportunity to chase the bird that we love. And so through time, what happened was that in many places, the season structure had absolutely nothing to do with biology. It had absolutely nothing to do with the biology of the bird, because for many, many decades, the science community has recognized that the most conservative spring season framework would have the seasons opening commensurate with peaks in nest incubation, which would, in other words, you would start killing toms at a period when a lot of nests were already on the ground and hens were sitting on those nests. And if you did that, then you could, in theory, harvest a percentage of toms from the population, and it would have no impact whatsoever because breeding was largely completed. And so we've known biologically that that is the most conservative season and most appropriate season. But through time, those kind of that recognition, if you will, kind of got kicked out of the door, and it was because of us. I mean, right? We're pressuring our state agencies and politicians to try to get seasons to open earlier so that we could be out there, and through time, the result has been kind of predictable. And I was actually interviewing someone the other day who was in the turkey world during restoration. In fact, he was a huge player in restoration. And we were talking about this subject. And he commented to me that, we kind of knew as agencies were starting to push seasons opening earlier and earlier and earlier, we were having discussions 30 years ago about at some point those seasons are going to have to change, right? Because turkey populations are going to kind of stop growing and they're going to start declining at some point, and that's essentially what's happened. So yeah, I get the frustration. I hear it as well.
Well, that's something that we did not talk about in our last podcast, though, and I think you phrased that really well too. The timing of the season in retrospect to the hen's already been bred and nesting. I didn't really think about it that way.
Yeah, that's true. From a management standpoint, that makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Put some of the biology into it, like you were saying, rather than just.
Yeah, I mean that there were documents written in the 1990s that were widely available and discussed in the turkey research world, noting that the most conservative seasons would be framed around, okay, let's open the season when toms are, when they're expendable to some degree. And that would be when most breeding is done and hens are incubating. And then if you look about 25 years later, another study that was supported by all of the Southeastern wildlife agencies was published. It was essentially a white paper that ended up in a peer-reviewed journal, and the authors of that paper, who were all, and many are still, state agency biologists in the South. In that particular paper, they noted that a less conservative but also biologically appropriate season framework would be to open it when you are having peaks in laying activity. In other words, a large percentage of your hens are already laying eggs in nests. They're not incubating it yet, but they're laying eggs in the nest. And their point was, we need to, if it's not palatable to the state to open as late as peaks and nest incubation, then perhaps it would be palatable to open at peaks and laying activity, which are on average, about 10 days earlier than peaks in incubation. And so this has been widely recognized in the turkey science world for decades. Again, it's just, we want to be a field when birds start talking, and I get it. I'm a turkey hunter. I want to be out there when birds are growling too,
Yeah, 100%. Can you break that down for us a little bit? And when I say break it down, from a time perspective, so from when that, that tom copulates and that turkey takes, what is that hen from that time of breeding through nesting? What, from a time period perspective, what does that look like?
Okay, yeah. So hens can and will store sperm in tubules inside their body. So a hen will copulate with a tom, and she will store sperm for some period of time. Um, there is a fallacy in the wild turkey world that I've heard it said before, that one tom, one time. This notion that, okay, they only need to breed one time to be able to produce a clutch. While that is biologically plausible and true to some degree, what many people, I think, don't see is that hens will continue to copulate with toms during the breeding season. She will copulate multiple times with the same tom, and she will copulate other times with different toms, which is why we see that about 40% of all clutches that are hatched have more than one tom represented in the clutch. Multi-paternity is something important to this bird. So to your question, what happens is they start copulating, breeding with toms, they're storing sperm. If you think about it from her perspective, that makes complete sense. If you store sperm from multiple birds or from multiple breeding attempts, that when your body says it's time, an egg goes into the oviduct and her body says it's time to fertilize these eggs, and her body releases sperm, the best sperm wins, right? The most viable sperm wins. And so there's mate competition at that level. And then the eggs are fertilized, she lays the eggs, they hatch. And so there's fitness advantages for her breeding with multiple toms or breeding with the same tom over and over and over, because what research has shown is the longer the sperm sits in the tubules, the less viable it is, right? So this idea that she would breed 30 or 40 days before she starts producing eggs, yes, that's possible, but that overlooks the obvious biological underpinning. She wants to breed multiple times because it's going to improve her fitness and her fertility, which is why the commercial poultry industry, they artificially inseminate birds about every week. And the reason they're doing that is research has shown that constant breeding activity improves the fertility of the flock in general. And so in the turkey world, she's breeding, she's breeding, she's breeding. Suddenly her body says, weeks later, hey, it's time to start laying a clutch. It takes her about 2 weeks to lay a clutch of eggs on average, because the average clutch size is about 10 to 12, depending on, the bird and the year and the spot. She lays an egg every day, pretty much. She may skip a day every now and then, so just assume 2 weeks. And then she sits on those eggs for about 27 to 29 days. So she incubates for close to a month. And during that time, she stays on the nest all night for the most part. She leaves the nest typically once a day, sometimes more, sometimes not at all. And then after about a month, if she's lucky enough, she hatches the clutch. And so that process, if you kind of think about it, that process, just laying an incubation, tethered her to that nest for about 45 days, right? In other words, her behavior is just kind of stuck around this nest site. And then if she hatches, she's lucky enough to hatch, then her poults they're flight capable after about 2 weeks or so. And then after about a month, that's kind of when we stop tracking them intensively. They're chicken size and they're in pretty good shape survival wise at that point.
Yeah, that's interesting. We didn't, like I said.
That's fast. 2 weeks, they can fly that. Didn't know that.
Well, I think it's a matter of necessity at that
well,
point in time, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, think about a turkey, like how big their eggs are, right? I mean, that's a lot of energy to produce that egg. And so if you look at turkeys kind of as a functional bird, they're big and they produce a large clutch size of large eggs. So there's a lot of energy that goes into producing one clutch of eggs. And that's a and the reason I'm kind of mentioning that is it takes hens, they burn a ton of energy and fat storage to get through the nesting season each year. It's a real stress on them.
When the hen is incubating, I mean, how often does she leave to feed, or does she at all?
We found that most of the time they leave once a day. They stay gone for about an hour on average. Now we see all kinds of variation in that. We've seen instances where a particular hen may stay gone for 2 or 3 hours from her nest. Excuse me, but the average is about once a day for about an hour.
Mm-hmm. And that's to feed, I assume, right? Just
to feed, to preen, because if you think about it, they're sitting there on this clutch of eggs. They're kind of hunkered down and they're hiding. They can't really, although they do, they preen their feathers, which kind of aligns the feathers like shingles on a roof and ensures that they're weatherproofed. But her preen gland is at the base of her tail, which is what produces the oil that she spreads on her feathers to weatherproof herself. And so you'll commonly see when hens take that, we call it a recess, but when they take that recess from nesting each day, they'll go somewhere near the nest, they will feed, defecate, and they will preen to kind of get themselves back in the condition to where they're weatherproof to sit on those eggs.
The, you know, and I know this is jumping ahead a hair, but one thing that I've always noticed, it's amazing how fast those poults grow after they're hatched. I can picture like Southern Georgia or Kentucky, the Kentucky farm, where I see after they've hatched, and I first see them the first time, and then it seems like within a few weeks later they've doubled or tripled in size. Those things are getting after it.
Yeah, and that if you think about it from their perspective, growing fast is going to improve your survival because the faster you grow, the larger you're going to be, the faster you can start molting your plumage, molting your feathers, and the faster you can start roosting off the ground at night. So that first couple of weeks, they're hatched, they're covered in down, they're not waterproof at all, they can't thermoregulate, and so weather is really problematic at that time. So it behooves you as a poult to grow as fast as you can, as quickly as you can. And so to your point, Sean, they literally don't even look like the same species, from one week to the next. And within a number of weeks, they're starting to already look like mom, and that's just, I mean, it's kind of how they're adapted to doing that is grow fast because growing fast improves survival.
Yeah, I know for me, especially I'll use Kentucky, for example, come mid to late summer, all of a sudden it looks like those poults are, they're 5, 6 pounds. I mean, and they're probably not that big, but considered the things you first saw to what they look like now, and then they're all already flight capable and they're zipping around like that. And it's pretty amazing to see how fast they grow. And I don't know anything else in nature that grows that fast aside from maybe a dolphin in the ocean. That thing is getting it.
Yeah, they do. They grow quickly, and I think it's funny when you see the same group of birds. Say, I saw them last week. Now I saw them again, and they don't even look like the same birds, right? They're growing so quickly, and they're replacing feathers so quickly, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So can we talk about I'll circle back just for a second because we kind of brushed over it. So we made mention about turkey numbers, comparatively speaking, from what they might have looked like 20, 30, 40 years ago to now. And I don't think most people understand that there was a point in time, like you said, that a lot of states didn't have turkey hunting. And then I know as a kid, growing up, while we did hunt turkeys, there weren't near the numbers that we're seeing right now by any stretch. And I hunt both Osceolas and Easterns, living in Florida and then having a farm in Kentucky. So I'm fortunate enough to do both. And I've seen it in both places. Like the population or it wasn't necessarily a rarity to find birds, but it was hard to kill a turkey back in those days.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And, for younger turkey hunters, it is hard to even think about this, but like in the 1960s and 70s, you know, in many places there were no turkeys. I mean, there were turkeys in pockets across the eastern United States and even parts of the Midwest, but the wild turkey was not present in many states. And then as restoration activities started to accelerate a little bit during the late 1970s and early 80s, you had organizations like NWTF that came aboard. There was there was this agreement amongst state agencies to try to restore turkeys using trap and transport, right? Where you go in and you catch a winter flock of birds in one area and you box them up and you take them to some other area and you release them. Um, those restoration efforts were kind of slow to get out of the box. I was talking about this again the other day as part of a film project I'm working on. You know, a lot of states were slowly kind of restoring populations to their state by moving birds within their own state, right? So, you know, this state A would go and catch some birds from someone's farm and move them over to some different county in that state, and and populations were expanding, but they were not exploding. And then suddenly in the late 80s and early 90s, restoration activities really took off, and they took off when there was a system put in place to where states could cooperatively engage with NWTF to capture birds and move them across state lines. And once that started occurring, you started seeing situations where states were accepting birds from multiple source states. So in other words, you may have had excuse me, a state like North Carolina, for instance, that may have taken birds from 3, 4, 5 different states, and suddenly populations exploded because the trap and transport was occurring very quickly. And at that time, a lot, there were states that didn't have spring turkey seasons, and then suddenly restoration occurs. The general consensus was once populations were being restored, that hunting would be closed for 5 years after that point to allow populations to really expand and get solidified. And then what you saw is states started implementing spring seasons. Some, states in the heart of the species range had had a season for many years, but then other states were getting a season for the first time. And turkey hunting, the popularity of turkey hunting literally exploded. I can remember as a teenager in the 1980s, I don't, outside of 2 buddies of mine, I don't remember anybody in my high school that turkey hunted. I had some friends that would periodically kill a turkey in the fall while they were deer hunting, but I only knew of about 2 or 3 guys in my school that got up like I did and went and hunted spring turkeys. And then you fast forward to the 1990s, and you I don't know how old you guys are, but I'm 54, and I can remember in the 1990s the popularity of turkey hunting just absolutely going haywire. And then as the 2000s approached, this industry, this machine kept growing, and that's when you really started seeing a lot of the hunting industry that's framed around spring turkey hunting really started to expand. What a lot of people did not know, and what we were documenting at the time, but it didn't click. And I'm embarrassed to say that it didn't, but it just didn't click. And what I mean by that is populations were already starting to decline in many parts of the South and East. It's that the decline from one year to the next wasn't obvious enough to even see it. But once you started looking at 10 years of data or 15 years of data, you could see that even during restoration, there were some populations in the South that as trap and transport was ending, those populations were starting to really slowly decline. And so that was occurring while this sport that we cherish was just exploding in popularity. And it took until 2000, 15, 16, 17. At that point, myself and 2 other researchers started publishing data showing that there had been long-term declines in the South. And like I was talking about with this man the other day, is we kind of got blindsided. We thought things were really good, and turkeys were everywhere, and you could hunt them, and you could increase bag limits, and you could liberalize seasons, and you could do all these things to enjoy this bird and the passion that is turkey hunting. And right under our damn noses, the populations were declining, and we kind of got caught with our pants down, if you will. And now a lot of the research that has been ongoing for the last 10 years should have been occurring prior to that. It's just that we kind of took our foot off the gas and we lost sight of what the population was doing, and now we're trying to kind of catch back up.
What do you think what was the major cause of that? Was it a combination of hunting and loss of habitat, or I mean, was there something else, some other, you know, villain that caused that decline?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot. I think it was probably a scenario that varied literally from one state to the other state. It was a situation where you had all these things that were occurring and none of them were positive for the wild turkey. And so if you look at, let's just say, the 1990s, 2000s, 2010 to 2020, and you look at how much habitat has been lost across the species range, and how, particularly in the Southeast, people have moved, the urban centers of the Southeast have just exploded in size and footprint. And that chews up habitat that the wild turkey used to have. While we've been doing that, we've also fragmented the remaining habitat. We've put roads through it. We've put subdivisions. We've put rights of way, power and gas rights of way, and all of those things chew up and fragment habitat. And what that has done, there's a number of studies showing this, that many of the critters that eat turkeys and their eggs benefit from that kind of fragmentation. It makes it more efficient and effective for them to hunt when they can hunt smaller parcels of vegetation than larger, and all of that was ongoing while there were emerging disease issues with turkeys that we didn't even know were out there. And at the same time, we're hunting this bird, and like we've talked about, we were liberalizing hunting seasons while all of this was going on. And we kind of thought, you could basically shoot as many as you wanted and whenever you wanted, and it wouldn't matter. And I'm not criticizing hunting. It's not a hunting problem. It's not a hunter problem. But you have to understand, as a turkey hunter, that we hunt turkeys during their breeding season, and that is unique in the game bird world. I'm a fanatical duck hunter as well. And if you told me I'm going to ship you to North Dakota and let you shoot mallards in May, I would tell you that you're insane. But that's what we do with wild turkeys. We hunt them while they're breeding and while they're trying to be reproductively active. And we do that because that is the essence of spring turkey hunting, is engaging with this bird that's in his mating system, and he's going through his displays, and he's being interactive and engaging, and that's what hooks us. That's what we get up every morning to experience. But on the flip side of that, you need to understand, as a hunter, that what we're doing is quite unique in the game bird world, that we hunt this bird while they're breeding. And so, to your question, I think all of that across 20 or 30 years of time, when again we weren't paying attention, really kind of blindsided us. And I remember when I graduated from graduate school in 1999, there were turkey studies everywhere. Everywhere. There were turkey projects in all bunches of different states. I can remember going to meetings in 2001, 2, 3, and then suddenly I stopped seeing these people that would come to these meetings, and I would realize, oh, that project ended in whatever state. And the pool of people that do what I do kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And what was happening was agencies thought we're good, right? We've made it. We made it to our target. We're good. We've got turkeys everywhere. let's take our foot off the gas and let's put resources elsewhere, whether it was studying other game species or whatever it was. And so you went through a period of about 10 years where from about 2004 to 2014, where you didn't see very much turkey research. There was some, of course, but the people doing it it was a very small pool of us. And what was happening during that 10-year period is populations were declining in many places right under our noses. And that would have been the time to be having research ongoing, but we didn't. And that's human nature in a lot of ways. And so
Complacency strikes again.
bonds. Exactly. Exactly. And we do this with and it's not just a turkey issue. We're complacent as human beings are complacent. When we're successful, we tend to often take our foot off the gas. And like I was talking about with someone the other day is, had we not taken our foot off the gas and we had not gotten complacent, then there's a possibility that we could have avoided some of the issues that were, at least the magnitude of the issues that we're having now. But again, hindsight's 2020, and now there's a lot of research ongoing trying to figure out what do we do moving forward.
What are some of the issues that are happening right now?
Habitat loss is probably the biggest one, I think.
Habitat is huge, man. And it's not just loss either. If you look in my travels, and I travel all over North America, hunting birds, looking at places turkeys live, and I'm blessed to be able to do that as part of my job. And I see not just loss, but I see changes to how we manage or treat our land. I see a overwhelming lack of management in many areas. In other words, just essentially almost like custodial management. Like, I'm not going to do anything to this. I'm just going to leave it like it is. I go out in the Midwest and I see farming practices that are much more intensive and efficient than they were several decades ago. That changes the availability of waste grain, for instance, which is an important winter food item for turkeys in agricultural areas. I see a lack of prescribed fire being used in the Southeast because of liability and political and social constraints, among other things. And so the places that I travel, I see themes that are the same, but the players might be slightly different depending on where you are, if that makes sense.
I don't know. I think it's something different. I blame Mossy Oak Bottomland. That's when it all went sideways.
No, but I tell you what, if you think about it like this too, I can remember it in like early 2000s. Well, I'll give you an example. I took my son, Austin, and I shot a bird in front of him. He was 5 years old. And I had one of those little like foldable hen decoys that you stuck in the back of your vest, right? That looked like crap. Like, I can't believe a bird ever walked up to that thing. But I can remember shooting that bird with a Browning A5 that had a full choke in it. And I can remember whispering to Austin, "Be still, be still." I kept whispering, "Be still, be still, be still. I've got to get him. He needs to come 10 more yards. And the bird was at 35 yards right then. That bird's dead as a doornail today.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'd shoot when he got to 35, he's dead. The decoy that he was skeptical of, he was probably skeptical of because it looked like something that didn't even resemble a turkey. And so just so much has changed over the years. I can remember the mouth call that I was using at the time. I thought sounded pretty good, and now compared to the calls that are sitting on this table behind me, it's not even close. So a lot has changed.
Well, and that's a very good point. And that was kind of where that joke was headed anyway, was, the the leaps and bounds in technology that we made, not only from a camo perspective, but also the calls and the decoys and everything else. You look at some of these Avian X decoys now, and some, especially some of these slate calls and diaphragm calls. Man, compared to when I was a kid, I spent an entire summer when I was a kid learning to call the diaphragm call, the entire summer, and I thought I was hot shit. I didn't see a turkey for 4 years. But that's a lot of that. But technology has changed and things are getting better. And like you said, your decoy is absolutely right. I can remember. Well, we go to Fort Gaines, Georgia, to hunt in South Georgia every year to hunt birds there, and they've still got a pile of them old foldable ones that kind of had a stake that you job down its ass and put it in the ground. And man, that thing don't look anything like a turkey. Most of it don't have paint on it either. It's horrible. Like, why would they ever come to that?
Yeah. Yeah. And what's, I had this conversation with someone the other day. You kind of reflect on what's changed over time, and you think as an old, as a 50-something-year-old, I go, damn, it's changed a lot. And then I think that's awesome. Like the fact that there's been so much interest in this bird and being able to engage and interact with this bird and spend time in the spring woods with this bird. That's great. Like that's so cool. It's just that I'll look at it through two lenses. I see the lens of, man, this has really changed a lot in the last 20 years. And then I look through it as the lens of, and that's super cool that so many people are engaged with wanting to hunt this bird. And it just tells me that we're just going to have to balance, right? We're going to have to balance through time our zeal to interact with the bird and to hunt the bird and to shoot the bird and be successful. We're going to have to balance that zeal with the reality of the populations that we have right now. And that's where scientists provide data to state agencies, and then state agencies use the data or not to make whatever decisions they make. And then us turkey hunters, we deal with that. And I think as long as turkey hunters just recognize that there has to be a balance, then the future of the bird is bright.
I'll contribute a little bit, tell you a little story. So for a lot of years, I didn't hunt turkey at all. And then, I bought that farm in Kentucky, and I met a man by the name of Bill Mullins, who is the director of the NWTF Longbeards chapter, which is a tri-state chapter that does northwest West Virginia, northwest Kentucky, and southeast Ohio, and invited me to an NWTF event, and I hadn't been in years and years and years. And man, it was cool to see the kids there and everything that we were doing. So then we got involved the next year and we donated a youth hunt. Well, from there, it just escalated. Now we're doing youth hunts, and now we're sponsoring trips to come down here for those kids to come to Osceola's now. And that was really, for me, getting involved with that group again, that really kind of lit me on fire a little bit. And seeing those kids, tell you what, seeing a kid hunt a turkey, man, that's the coolest thing in the world. That if that don't get you fired up, nothing will.
Yeah. Yeah. Those eyeballs that go from being tiny to literally like saucers. Just the glee that you see in a child when they hoist that first bird. Like you say, if that doesn't hook you to the passion of what we're doing as turkey hunters, then you're a lost cause, man. It's so cool. And I also do a veterans hunt every year, and I see the same type of reaction in some of these veterans that are on their first turkey hunt. But I see it through a set of eyes that have seen a lot, right? They've seen a lot, they've experienced a lot. They look at the world very differently than a 10-year-old that shot their first turkey, and they're just they're beside themselves. But the love is the same, right? It's the same experience, it's the same look. It's just through the lens of an eye that has seen a lot of the world as a 30 or 40-year-old that's been through, what some of these folks have been through versus a 10-year-old. But, yeah, if you can call a turkey up or have a turkey called up to you and shoot it and not just literally lose all sense of reality, and, then turkey hunting is not for you, man. If you're not hyperventilating, that's not your sport.
I do have a question. How, like, I saw the NWTF, like, like shot show kind of thing
In Nashville.
in
Yeah.
Nashville. Like, I saw it all on Instagram and everything. So, but you on the academic side are saying that, hey, we are actually in a crisis or leading up to a crisis of going back to what they were with turkey populations. But if I was just a turkey hunter, I would be like, things are great. You know, every ammo company's got their turkey load. Everyone's got a new turkey vest or, you know, whatever kind of 410 shotgun that they're selling. How do you balance that? You know, on the research side, I'm just being like, hey, we actually have a problem here.
Yeah, and I know you were trying to get the question across. I certainly wouldn't call what we have a crisis per se. I understand what you're getting at. Um, yeah, I think it goes back to balance, and that's kind of what I was saying before. When I was at the convention, there were 90,000 people that came through that convention hall, and they would not have been there if they were not passionate about the wild turkey and didn't want to interact with other people that are passionate about the wild turkey. And that's a great thing. I think from a science research perspective, all I can do is show people what the data show, right? I can explain the data to people and then I can provide that information to agencies and then they have to use the information as they see fit. But in these conversations like what we're having, I can offer the perspective of, you know, I've seen this from the time I was a teenager. And if you could find a turkey to hunt, you were doing pretty good. I've seen it when I didn't know which direction to go. There were so many turkeys gobbling in the spot I was in. There were turkeys everywhere. I literally was paralyzed. I didn't know which direction to go. And now I can go back to some of those same places across 40 years. And if I hear a turkey, I'm back to having a good day. And so I can offer that perspective to people and say, we just have to balance what we're doing here. Populations have declined and they're never going back to where they were in the mid 1990s. They're never going back there. We will never see turkey population numbers like we saw decades ago because the landscapes that we live on and the bird lives on are not like they were and they never will be again. So we're working under somewhat of a new reality with turkeys and many, not just turkeys, think about any game species. I mean, look out west with what's occurring with mule deer herds. I mean, you have a lot of species that are struggling in some ways in some areas, and it's going to take striking a balance between our desire to chase the animal and to kill the animal with, okay, what's the abundance, what's the ability for the population to sustain kind of that love and that passion.
I can remember, Oscar, just to go back a little bit, I started hunting turkeys in the 80s, probably closer to the late 80s, and then, you know, on in the early 90s. And back in those days, you know, as a kid, we were wearing Army surplus BDUs and like an old, you know, Tropic Thunder kind of cap and no face mask and no nothing, and out there with an 870 Express combo chasing these things. And now, you know, we attend SCI and we go to all these events, and to see the boom in popularity is really great. And I think that the vast majority of hunters, you know, given the opportunity to preserve the population and do their part, are going to do it. I don't think they're the problem. I think the problem comes in, like I said, habitat loss. I do agree. I think that's a big issue. You know, just look at the land I had to hunt as a kid compared to what we have now. And you can see it here locally in Okeechobee. Look at all the PUD developments that are going in right now.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
we've got 30,000 acres just proposed in the last 2 months of being developed and putting track houses in. I mean, that's current turkey population right now. That's their habitat, and it's going to be developed. And so what do you do
Yeah.
about it though? I mean,
Yep.
what is the, you know, what is the ultimate fix to it? And that's a very sticky question right there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Sean. I don't see I've never spoken with a turkey hunter in my life that said, I don't want turkeys anymore. I don't want sustainable populations. I don't want to be able to hunt this bird anymore. Every turkey hunter I run across, they want this bird on the landscape, and they're willing to give a lot to make sure the bird's there. And now within the past 4 or 5 years, I don't interact with many hunters that don't see a problem. Very, very rarely will I come across a hunter at a convention or a meeting or something that says to me, "What the hell are you talking about? If turkeys are doing wonderful, they're doing great." Even hunters that I interact with that say, I've got quite a few turkeys around my area, will say, but I don't have the numbers that I had 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And so I don't think turkey hunters, to a man or woman, don't see the need for conserving and sustaining populations. To Sean's point, I think one of the major issues we're going to face and are already facing is prioritizing the wild turkey and the landscapes that they live on, because there's competing land uses that are going to win. And Florida, you mentioned Florida, is a microcosm for what the turkey is facing across its geographic range. You literally have a state that's imploding in on itself. And so you have infrastructure that is changing literally by the week. I mean, it looks different by the week. You have urbanization and suburban development that is at a scale that's somewhat concerning and kind of scary in many ways. If you places that I go in Florida every year, driving into some of the places I go, I don't hardly recognize. It doesn't even look like the same landscape that it looked like 4 or 5 years ago. And I think what we're going to have to do, not just for turkeys, but with many wildlife species, is we're going to have to work as a community to incentivize the general public to care about the species that we cherish and the landscapes that they thrive in, because there's many other species that are also thriving in those same landscapes and vegetative communities. And if I can use a turkey to make, if I can get people to care about turkeys and where they live and thrive, then I'm going to secondarily benefit a lot of other species that also live and thrive in those same places. So that I kind of look at it as that's our call to order. We have to somehow prioritize sustaining this bird through the lens of there's competing land uses that want to win the battle, if you will.
From a compare and contrast perspective, looking here in Okeechobee, for example, where we all are sitting right now, compared to like the farm in Kentucky, which is in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, there's quite a bit of terrain change. But if you look at Montgomery Branch Road, where the farm is, there hadn't been a new house built in there, in aside from mine, in 20 years, right? The farms haven't changed hands. There's still the timber there. There's a little bit of agriculture. And what we've done, with the timber stand improvement and habitat improvement, we've increased our turkey population. It feels like tenfold, and we've been really successful at it. And so there's little places here, but if you drive 30 minutes down the road in either direction, all that old farmland now, it's housing communities, shopping malls, on and on and on. So where you go to that farm there and you think, man, we're doing great. But then all these other people that we talk to that we're friends with now in that part of the world, in Southern Ohio and places like that, Mike Staffen, for example, in Johnstown, the turkeys that we saw 15 years ago when we were deer hunting, you don't see turkeys anymore there. They're gone. Like, we just don't see. It's not unusual to go through the entirety of a bow season or a gun season in central Ohio and not see a turkey now. It's crazy.
Crazy. Well, it's like Doc was saying. You got this habitat being chopped up and being split up, and all the different things that create none of it good for the turkey. Not any of it,
or other wildlife, as it would have it. But we talked about, so you talked about habitat a little bit, and during our last podcast, it was brought to my attention that, and I'm a big habitat man, right? So I really pride myself on habitat improvements and trying to, put the land, from a wildlife perspective, do as much to my land as I possibly can to encourage all forms of wildlife, right? And so for the first time in ever, we're seeing rabbits now, and we're seeing foxes on the farm that we never saw before. But one of the things that I didn't realize is that, especially from a nesting and brooding habitat perspective, the shit that I like to spray in early spring and mid spring, with glyphosate, because it's not good for the deer population, is absolutely what turkeys need for nesting.
It can be, yeah, yeah. One thing that I don't think a lot of people realize, at least this is what I encounter when I talk with clients and landowners who are trying to, hey, I'm interested in turkeys, or I want to improve my turkey population. Here's what I'm doing, is they don't realize how limited, particularly brood habitat is. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Turkey hens nest in a lot of different places. They nest in a lot of different vegetative communities. They will nest successfully in places that are really, really thick and not so thick. But brood habitat is very, very specific, and it doesn't differ really from one spot to the other on the planet. And the analogy I use with people is, if you think about nesting habitat, it literally can just be, the hen has to be able to hide, but she can hide in fairly short vegetation. She can also hide in fairly tall vegetation. But when you start talking about an animal, a poult that's a few inches tall, and you realize that the only way to really see the world as they see it is to lay down on your stomach, and you start laying down on your stomach wherever you hunt, for whatever properties you can interact with or spend time on, you're going to realize really quickly that most of the landscape is not brood habitat, because you cannot possibly see in front of you laying on your stomach. And then when you kind of hop up on a knee and you sit on your knees and you look around you, that's the perspective a hen has. And if she can't see down and through that vegetation to move, and the poults can't move freely on the ground when they're very, very short, that's not brood habitat. And just because you see a brood at a spot doesn't mean that's quality brood habitat, if that makes sense. Just because you see a turkey here doesn't mean that's a good situation. And we see this very commonly with hens on some of our study sites that hatch a brood, and they may walk them a half mile the second day after they hatched. And what that tells me is she doesn't perceive any quality brood cover around her, and so she starts walking to try to find it. And yeah, that when I travel around, brood habitat is the most limiting thing that I see, and it's because of the fact that, one, it requires visibility, bare ground, open ground, but yet cover, and that often takes disturbance of some kind, some type of disturbance to the vegetation to produce those conditions. So imagine a scenario where you have native forbs and legumes that may be knee high, but under them is bare ground. And then right beside that area, you might have very open vegetation where poults can move out in it and forage, yet escape into that cover and hide when something threatens them from above. And then when you start considering that when they're a couple of weeks old, their diet starts to change, and then they start to increase their home range sizes once they start to roost off the ground at night. Now, all of a sudden, you realize that you need a lot of diversity in vegetation within a relatively small area. And I don't see a lot of that. When I go from property to property, I see a lot of the same stuff. This property doesn't look a whole lot different than that property. And it's because, like we talked about earlier, in many cases, there's kind of an overwhelming lack of management, of disturbance, if you will, to the landscape.
My mind just went to prescribed fire when you were talking about that.
Me too. Yeah, prescribed fire or soil disturbance, disking, anything that is going to increase the diversity of plants that are growing there, because when you're increasing plant diversity, you're in most cases also increasing insect diversity. And insects, as you have already talked about with others, obviously is critical to early pulp development and is also important for adults. So yeah, anything to improve plant diversity is a positive.
Yeah, Oscar, you were rooting on something over there.
No, I was thinking, I was like, is that why it is so hard to have like, I guess, to manage turkeys or manage, like your farm for turkeys? Because it's not just like a pasture. Like a pasture, it's pretty easy to maintain, I'd imagine. On there is literally just because you have to have 3 or 4 different kinds of environment on your property, and that requires everything that we talked about, all these different levels of, from pasture grass to all the way up to briars and everything.
Yeah, and you need trees for them to roost in.
Yeah, it makes managing turkeys on it makes managing turkeys on small acreage challenging, right? Because you may have, let's say, 2 forest types, hardwood pine, let's just make it simple. And you may only have a certain amount of acreage of either one of those. And so your ability to produce this diversity that we're talking about becomes really complicated versus you own a fairly large piece of property, and then your options are more open, if you will. One thing that creates challenges for landowners from a turkey management perspective is that their requirements change so dramatically from one season to the next. And so, like, fall, winter, turkeys are using hardwoods in much of their range. They're focusing in on hardwoods that are dropping acorns, beech mast, some hard mast. They are in big winter flocks. They're gregarious, so they hang around with each other a lot. In some places, they use large home ranges, so they may cover multiple properties, even if you own a lot of acreage. And then you can go to some other place in the United States or beyond, say an agricultural landscape, and their home ranges may be quite small. They may be coming back to the same feedlots, the same areas day after day after day. But then suddenly they shift from, I'm going to use mast and waste grain and et cetera, to I'm going to move to my breeding range. And that usually results in them literally moving away from where they are. And that could be to the next property, or it could be miles down the road. I was just talking with a graduate student this morning that was explaining to me that one of the jakes that we put a GPS transmitter on last year, he's now becoming a 2-year-old Tom, right? And he's with some other Toms, and they were in a group, and several of them just split out the other day and went 3 miles down the road, like in a day. And now they're 3 miles down the road. So if you owned 100 acres and you were getting trail camera pictures of those birds every day, suddenly they're gone, right? And they're gone because they require something different in the spring when they're breeding than when they were in the winter. And then suddenly you get, like we talked about, let's say the hen hatches. Now she needs something entirely different from where she was nesting. She was nesting in cover, where she could hide. Now she needs to be able to find areas where poults can move around and can navigate and also can escape predation risk. And so it just speaks to kind of how their annual cycle changes, and that creates complexities for management because it does require, to your point, it requires just a diverse suite of conditions on the landscape.
Gotcha. Now that makes sense, because I've met guys that are always like, I got a honey hole, and everything in wintertime. Look at all these turkeys. And then opening day, we'll go out there and there's like not a turkey in sight. I'm like, you must have been confusing another bird.
Well, you're talking about seeing turkeys during deer season and then going back in the spring and they're just not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a common scenario, man. I hear it all the time. It's like, what the hell happened to my birds? I was getting, 10 on camera. They're big long beards. They were here every single day from December, January, February, and now they're gone. And I have to say, yeah, and they're not coming back right now. They've moved to where they're going to breed, and then I see scenarios like a friend of mine that doesn't live too far from me here. He never has turkeys until March. Never. He never has turkeys on his property during the fall and winter. And suddenly around March the 10th to the 15th every year, birds show up on his property. And it's because they've been coming to that area for generations to breed. And he's successful hunting every year on this property. And he never gets a trail camera picture in the fall or the winter. It's never until spring. And then once breeding season is over, they disappear again. He doesn't see turkeys during the summer either, unless a hen happens to hatch a brood. So it just speaks to the here today, gone tomorrow nature.
I guess that just says how lucky we are, like that Kentucky farm, for example, right? That we see them year round.
Turkeys everywhere.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether we're, in the spring we see them in the fall, we see them.
I saw them in December like 31st.
Yeah. But one of the things I did notice, Doc, and I'll bring this up to you, when I first started my timber stand improvement, and initially it was 100% about whitetails. And that farm was essentially it was a giant closed canopy of timber is all it was. And then when I started opening that up, when I start in those areas that we allocated for, I'm going to call it, deer bedding areas that I knew that it was going to grow up. So we really cut it really hard in those areas. But for the first year or so, that early successional growth was coming in. Man, you could pin a turkey down. I'm like, they were going to be in there. That they were going to be there. You're going to see them in there early, early in the spring, or excuse me, nesting period of time. But then as that started to get thicker and thicker and thicker and grow up to where the whitetail likes to bed in it, then the turkeys don't go in there anymore. Or at least I don't see them in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's right. What you just saw was trajectory of succession when it was in early succession, it was turkey habitat central. They were, they loved it. And once it started succeeding to where they had difficulty navigating through it, walking through it, then they quit using it. Yep. And at that point, it's time to do a reset from a vegetative management standpoint.
Yeah, and the other thing I've noticed too, especially if we've had a hard winter like we have right now, for example. So it snowed yesterday. Again, it's crazy to see gobblers walking in the snow, all puffed up and strutting out there. That's a cool thing to watch. But when we have a hard winter, a lot of those thick places with all the broadleafs, they'll die down so early, especially like right now before it really starts warming. And right now the soil temperature is still probably in the 30s there, so really nothing new starting to pop up. And because of that, I will see them and catch them on cameras in those areas that I don't after, spring green up comes. You'll see them right now, but after that green up comes and it gets thick in there, you won't see them again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense.
And what about, how much does terrain play a factor in that? Because, we've got quite a bit of elevation change. We talked earlier, it's somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 feet of elevation change on that farm. How much does, terrain, not only just habitat, but the terrain itself play into, where turkeys like to be and how they like to move?
Yeah, it really depends on the severity of the terrain. What you see in situations where, like for instance, this morning I was in the field with a student we're going into these roost locations that are disproportionately used, and the most important roosts. They're used repeatedly by multiple birds through time, and we're measuring, quantifying what's there so that we can kind of predict out across the landscape where other high priority roosting areas would likely be. And one thing it's very keen to the eye as soon as you visit enough of them is that, that terrain matters from a roosting perspective for sure. That, rugged kind of areas are attractive to the bird. That should make sense if you think about it, because if you're sleeping in an area that's rugged and steep and there's terrain breaks, then it prevents things from being able to get under you efficiently. You can fly up to the top or fly down to the bottom if you're kind of mid-slope. as you go out west and you see some of the species like Goulds and Merriams that live in really mountainous terrain, they don't give a shit one way or the other. I mean, they'll walk straight up a cliff face and it doesn't seem to phase them at all. Um, and then you'll get down in eastern subspecies range and a little creek of water that you can step across stops a bird and seems to influence their behavior. Um, so we really don't see, for the most part, we don't see terrain being a huge thing, except it does appear to influence where they're going to roost. If they're roosting in areas that have terrain, obviously, if you're in flat woods, it's not, no big deal. But as you go into more upland forest, it does seem to influence kind of where they're going to choose to roost. And what we found in Louisiana on a project, actually on a study site that was, think literally you walk off a cliff, and if you tripped up, you would like roll all the way down to the bottom, and you'd have to like airlift your way out of there, like incomprehensibly steep stuff. And what we saw in that study is when hunting pressure started, those birds would go into those rugged canyons and just disappear. And so I think the bird is capable. They're so adaptive that they're capable of dealing with a lot of terrain issues, and in some cases actually benefiting from rugged terrain because they use it to their advantage. And we also see this. We saw this in a study site in Nebraska where these birds would get in these really steep canyons, and they would essentially disappear in those canyons because it is so rugged, and they could use those canyons to travel and essentially be undetected because it was so rugged that they could get inside those canyon faces and those walls and move up and down without being observed.
Is that also protection from the elements and the wind? If it's super windy out there, that's for me, that's the quickest thing to screw up a perfectly good turkey hunt is when that wind's blowing 30 miles an hour. But that also gets in there and kind of shades them from the elements a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And what we also see, which is interesting to me, not really kind of a terrain thing, but I guess it is aspect, right? The direction that the slope is facing seems to matter. We see this particularly as you go out west and you get in more dry, arid conditions. Birds are disproportionately selecting north-facing slopes. So you may have really rugged terrain, and they're not only is they're capable of using all of that terrain, but they disproportionately use certain parts of it because it has a certain aspect. And what we found is that, those north facing slopes tend to be wetter, tend to be more productive when you go out in really hostile, dry, mountainous areas. There's more moisture on north facing slopes. So the vegetation is a little more succulent, and you would expect the bird to use that. So these things we're talking about, as I talk through them, it never ceases to amaze me. If you travel enough and see enough of the wild turkey's range, you will realize how incredibly adaptable this bird is. They can live in some really challenging situations, and the fact that you're sitting there, talking about Florida birds that can live in some of the wettest, swampiest, stuff, and then it's the same species, but it's a different subspecies. But the Gould's is living at 10,000 feet elevation and is using landscapes that almost have no free water on them outside of some cattle tanks and things. It's just remarkable to me how adaptable that bird is.
You mentioned, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point it out. You in that last section we talked about, how it's amazing that a turkey will get down to a little creek that, no more than, I'll call it 10, 15 foot wide, and they won't come over it. And I've seen that throughout my turkey hunting career. And then I've had other people that swear that's bullshit. That's not a thing. But for me personally, man, I struggle getting a bird across the body of water. And I don't care if they just got to step over it or they can just hop, but man, they just don't like it for whatever reason.
Yeah. I've seen situations where they would not cross something they could step over. I've seen situations where they walked up to a single strand barbed wire fence and wouldn't step under it or over it. And I've also seen situations where a bird flew a river and I killed him. So that's part of why turkey hunting is so addictive, is because it's so maddening. You've got this bird that can do all of these things, and you know damn well they could step over that creek or hop right across it, and they refuse to. And it's maddening because you know that he can do it easily if he so chooses, but he chose not to. And the fact that you can encounter the bird a week later and he does something different, or even the next day and he does something different, is part of why turkey hunting is so addictive and frustrating, and it's so cool all wrapped up together, is because there's just no predicting what this bird's going to do.
It is really funny because, like, turkey hunting for me, it's like waking up at 3 a.m. to get into the blind, super quiet. You walk in like half a mile into the blind and everything. And then in Long Island, there's those like UPS guys that get chased by wild turkeys all the time. All the time.
I got some friends up in Cape Cod and Hyannis, right? Big popular summer town. And I go up there sometimes to tuna fish with those guys. And there are turkeys right in the center of town, in the middle of the road, pecking cars as they go by. It's hilarious. And yeah, they seem like they're everywhere because they're right in the middle of town. Yeah, same thing. These urban birds have quite the attitude.
Well, and I think that goes to those birds and those flocks can have separate personalities.
Yeah, we do see that. We do see that they have certain personalities, and that the whole idea of the suburban bird is really interesting to quite a few of us in the scientific world, because turkeys have clearly figured out how to live with human beings and live in close proximity. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be like attacking a mailman. It can be, I'm going to hang out and benefit from protection offered in suburban areas. There's less predator activity there. I can use a really small home range and still live if I have enough resources available to me. Or it could be as simple as you go out, South Dakota somewhere, and birds are coming into a feedlot every day and able to withstand incredibly harsh winters just because they have availability of silage and other things that are offered to livestock. And what we published some work just a few weeks ago, actually, showing this idea of what's called the human shield hypothesis. So basically this idea that individual birds that figure out to hang out near human activity could actually benefit from that human activity. And what we found is that you see a trade-off where hens that are using areas more closely associated with kind of consistent human activity may be more successful reproductively. They may have higher survival. They may have higher nest success, which suggests that they recognize the potential benefit of associating or dealing with human beings. And then, like what you just mentioned, and I think what that causes is, through time, when turkeys get acclimated to us, like any other wildlife species, you're ripe for a conflict. It's at some point, particularly when you get a tom that's as aggressive as some are in the spring, and they're looking for a fight, or are willing to fight at the drop of a hat, if you will. And then here comes the hapless male man or male woman, or the bird. Like my mother-in-law, she has birds that show up at her house every spring, and they see their reflection in the glass door when they walk up on the patio, and they beat the hell out of the door and the windows because they see their reflection. And I always joke with her. I was like, I can fix that for you. I can fix that for you 100%. Like, I will promise you that bird will never peck your glass door again. I promise you. But yeah,
That sounds like something I would say.
Turn them into nuggets.
And I've seen that. I talk about that bow shoot we did in Jacksonville last year with Staffen and Paul, and we're right outside NAS Jacks or whatever that installation is there. And those turkeys are used to people. You walk around there through the course of that bow shoot, and they just don't give a shit. You can walk, I'm going to say 10 yards between you and that turkey. He doesn't care. Zero. None. They are just used to people for whatever reason. And now you go hunt turkey somewhere else, man, you drive a car within a mile and you ain't going to see a turkey.
Yeah. This speaks to how complex they are as a bird, man. It's pretty wild.
Well, so one thing that I get all the time is everybody likes to blame, predators. How much of a scapegoat is that, or how much truth is there, from a predation perspective? How much are predators actually, responsible for the turkey populations as we see them?
I mean, there's no question that predators are impactful to turkeys. I mean, turkeys are wary of wild like they are because for millennia they've been dealing with predators in their environment. So the fact that the bird is as challenging to hunt as it is largely driven by the fact that they have to avoid being eaten by something. I don't think there's also any question that, the predation landscape that turkeys are dealing with in some places, not all, but in some places, is different than it was a few decades ago. You've seen, some species have increased their geographic range, like coyotes, and may be interacting with turkeys in situations where they didn't a few decades ago. And you've seen a collapse in the fur market, right? So there's no fur market anymore. And what that's translated to is, there's no appreciable harvest of many species, fur-bearing species that would prey on turkeys or their young. And at the same time, you've also seen, broad scale changes in bird populations, like particularly birds of prey. I can remember as a child, the idea of persecuting birds of prey was just common. It's something that I, as a child, I can remember hearing my uncle talk about, hawks and owls, and he wanted to remove them. And those days, disappeared many decades ago. And so, yeah, I think the wild turkey and many other game species and other wildlife species are dealing with predator communities that are just different now. And the other thing that I think is important to consider for a turkey is that in many situations, turkeys were restored into parts of the landscape, and predators did not know what they were, right? The local predator community didn't know that this is prey. And so it took time for some of these predator communities to kind of key in on the fact that, this is a prey source here. And so I think you tack all that in with what we've talked about earlier from a habitat loss and a habitat kind of fragmentation standpoint. And I think turkeys are dealing with incredibly rich predator populations now. And that's kind of, if you think about it, that's largely, that's most adult females that are hens that are killed by predators. Most nests that are lost are lost to predators. And so, sure, predators are certainly part of one factor that's influencing our populations.
And is there a duality in that? And from a habitat loss perspective, good turkey brooding habitat, for example, and the increase in the amount of predators, like you just said, those two things combined would almost certainly have an effect on the population of turkeys, kind of no matter where you are unilaterally.
Sure. Yeah. And something else I had a study looking at this a number of years ago where we collared raccoons and we tracked them in the presence of hens, and we artificially fed those raccoons in a kind of a grid design and tracked them. And what we were trying to figure out was, do raccoons change their behavior when they start encountering food, like abundant food? And we found that they did. And we showed what that looked like. And then we looked at when raccoons are moving through turkey nesting habitat and they're encountering these, prey items, does it look like they start like intensively searching for nest or food, or do they just kind of move about? And what we found was that in areas where turkeys were nesting, raccoons were just kind of moving through it. And where I'm headed with this is we also showed very clearly that when raccoons and coyotes are very similar, that they hunt with their noses. So you get an animal that has for instance, a road, and then they have this block of habitat that's beside that road. Under certain wind conditions, they can really efficiently hunt that piece of habitat, and they can smell what's in there. And if there's a bird nesting in there, eventually she's going to, have a predator encounter her nest. And if you kind of look at some of the more contemporary work that's been done showing how many predators can actually be in a small area, like how many individual animals could be using the same chunk of ground. That kind of jives with what we see with our turkey nesting data. And that is, it seems to be a random process. Like if she lays a clutch and there's a raccoon that's intensively using that area that she's nesting in, chances are the nest is lost. And so kind of the point there is it kind of speaks to the need to have a broad distribution and availability of nest and brood habitat so that we cannot put predators in situations where they're intensively using these limited areas that turkeys are using as well.
I'd love it. Well, you talk about duck hunting, Doc. That's me too. I'm more of a duck hunter than anything else. And down here, especially Lake Okeechobee, the prescribed fires, there haven't been any on the lake for years, but we just had two. We had one prescribed and one accidental, which everybody was screaming and yelling, but I was cheering from the rafters. It was awesome. So it opens up the habitat, and our poor lake has been destroyed.
Just so much public outcry with fire. It's really unfortunate. So much has changed, in the prescribed fire world too. I mean, now agencies they're under fuel load mandates for they're charged by law to try to reduce fuel loads. And what that's caused is a lot of agencies to try to increase the scale at which they're conducting fires. And so back in the 1990s, I can remember, prescribed fires on some of our study sites, 10 acres, 20 acres, at a time. And now I can drive you right across the lake from my house and show you a 2,000 acre fire that, was just conducted a week ago. So the fire world has changed for sure.
Yeah, I see the ranchers, especially down here. It not so much in Kentucky. It's just so steep there. It's really hard to burn, and to get somebody that's qualified to come in there and burn, and it's a little difficult. Everybody's scared shitless, and we have to have supplemental fire insurance too. And if we don't have fire lanes, then you're just not going to get it. So that's also because there is value to the timber there, so that's something different too. And I imagine places with planted pine are probably like that too. But I desperately want to burn, but finding somebody that's going to say, oh yeah, I'll come in there, and even though we'll doze everything and get it ready for them, I can't get anybody to come in and burn for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just had this conversation with a good friend of mine the other day who had a fire escape on him, and it was the day after the fire that it escaped. And, he did everything right. He did everything to the T, followed every rule to the book, and has ignited hundreds of fires in his life, and one ultimately escapes. And now he's worried from a liability perspective that he could be financially in a real pickle because the fire escaped and damaged some property adjacent to him. And, that will change his outlook on the use of fire inevitably. It has to, because of the liability associated with it. And I have another friend who owns a piece of property that there's a subdivision / town kind of right beside it. And over the course of the last couple of decades, that town has grown in footprint. And unfortunately, the footprint has grown in his direction. And so what's happened is because of smoke, he can only burn during very specific wind conditions because the smoke would end up in the town, right? In subdivisions that have expanded out from the town. And so it has fundamentally changed how he manages his property because of that. And then, you see that, I see that a lot around here, actually, where I live. There's a national forest very close, actually right across the lake from me. And I smell smoke in the air every day this time of year. And it doesn't bother me because I know what it is, but I talk to some of my neighbors who are quite concerned and upset about it because they walk outside and, if there's smoke in the air, visibility is limited. They don't like the smell of it. And you try to explain, well, this is being used to improve the habitat for wildlife. It's like, yeah, but it's I can't see across the lake and it chokes me and I don't want to go outside. And that's just a tiny little example of some of the big issues facing, federal agencies who they ignite a fire and there's a lawsuit filed against them for doing that, and it's just, it's really it kind of hamstrings our ability to implement this tool that's so beneficial to many wildlife species.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm a big proponent of fire, but like I said, for that farm in particular, now if you go north of there and you get into southern Ohio, it's really easy to burn, or
It's more rolling hills, right?
gentle. It's just that, because of that terrain change, it can jump on you in a hurry there too, especially if you're burning at, plus 2,000 feet. It doesn't take but a little bit of wind to set them embers off. And if you've got, that thick leaf litter that's dry, man, it can spark off in a hurry. Don't take long.
Yeah. Yeah. And in particular, as you just said, when you've got some terrain, fire could be a different beast. When you're dealing with terrain, it can behave a little bit differently than you expect if you're on flat ground, for sure.
Well, Doc, let's wrap this up. I know we've taken a bunch of your time, and we certainly appreciate it. But we've got a rapid fire segment that we like to do at the end of every podcast with a guest, and it's just whatever comes to mind. We're going to give you 4 or 5 of these real quick, and then maybe 1 or 2 wrap up questions. But so just lightning round. We're going to try to kill the myths, no mercy. Just give it to us. So I'll start with the first one. So goblin's down, so turkeys are down. True or false?
The question is, if gobbling is down, turkeys are down?
Yep.
False. Not necessarily.
What's one turkey fact you wish you could erase from the internet?
Spur length is a reliable indicator of age.
Dang it.
It's a good one right there.
Yeah.
That's a biggie.
What's one thing hunters should stop doing immediately?
Moving. Sorry.
One thing hunters should, this is the answer indirectly, they should stop being so impatient. Patience kills the bird.
What's one thing hunters should start paying attention to in the spring?
Their health. Their spouse. Yeah, their spouse maybe. I'm answering this truthfully. You asked me a question.
Yeah, that's perfect. I like it.
I mean, shit, that's the first thing that just came to mind was you said, what should hunters, and I put myself in that, what should I start paying attention to in the spring? My spouse.
Both of those answers go to planning.
Planning, there you go.
Yeah, being able to walk and being able to get permission to walk.
What's so if you're a landowner, you've got average ground and limited money, where is the best bang for your buck? Where should you start?
Gosh, visibility. Trying to create vegetative conditions that offer visibility to the bird, because if the bird can't see, then their survival mechanisms are hamstrung if they can't see.
What's your turkey setup?
What's that?
What's your turkey setup? 410, 20 gauge?
Oh, I shoot a 12, and it's because I'm a relic. I shoot a
Way
retain.
not intended. See, I'm not a heathen. I told you it wasn't just me.
Easy with that relic
Yeah.
stuff. I'm the same age as you.
Well, I just actually upgraded a few years ago. I shot an 870 until 2 years ago with an open sight, and I killed many, many, many turkeys with that gun. But I got to the point where my vision has started. My near vision is a little bit compromised because of staring at computers and everything. And so I started finding myself not being able to see the bird really clearly in the like in poor light conditions. And I missed a bird, and it really pissed me off. So I upgraded. So now I shoot a 12 gauge with a red dot, and yeah, it's good.
Back to the technological advances.
Yeah, and Doc, one
Exactly.
thing, yeah, for sure. One thing we didn't talk about, and I was remiss, we kind of got clustered there to begin with, but what is the Wild Turkey Lab exactly?
Yeah, so the Wild Turkey Lab is my lab at the University of Georgia. It's actually a website that's an archive of all of the things that I've done. It's also an archive of many other resources that turkey folks may be interested in, whether it's historical publications that NWTF supported. I archive all of my social media posts, most of the podcasts that I've done. Some, as you know, some you can't find anymore. I put all of the peer-reviewed manuscripts that my lab publishes or has ever published. There's way over 100 papers on that website. You can download the paper. You can see a summary, a lay summary, if you will. Like, this is what we did. This is what we found. This is why you should care. I have popular articles on there as well. And my point with that was simply to create an archive of what I've done so that when I'm gone, it's there. And I kind of want the Wild Turkey Lab to be a one-stop shop, if you will. If you go to that website and you search on pretty much anything, you're going to find a social media post I've made that is based on science. I don't post content that it's just nonsense. Or you'll find articles written about that topic. And as I continue to grow the website, that's what I'm trying to do, is to really create a one-stop shop. If you're a turkey enthusiast, you can go to that website and you can find content that's one, science-based, and two, is informative.
It's fantastic. So, for anybody that's not familiar with your work and that's watching this podcast, go ahead and plug your socials and tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So if you want to see the content that I post, you can follow me on Instagram or X, and that would be Wild Turkey Doc, Wild Turkey DOC. It's all one word. If you're on Facebook, you just type my name in and you'll find my page. I post similar content on those three platforms, although I tend to post more on Instagram than the other two. And I also tend to post personal content on Instagram that I don't share on the others as well, for a variety of reasons. But, yeah. And then if you, again, go to wildturkeylab.com, you can search around on that. If you're interested in some of the kind of emerging research that I'm doing, that doesn't kind of land on those pages, you can go to wildturkeydna.com. That's a website that houses a lot of the genetics work that we've started doing through a citizen science project. You can also follow Wild Turkey DNA on Facebook and Instagram, where we post content about some of the genetics work we're doing, which may sound really like not sexy at all, but is pretty cool stuff. We're posting, results of, plumage colors and turkeys, and as we move forward, we'll post, topics about hybridization and inbreeding and diversity, topics that we think are impactful to wild turkeys at a broad scale. you can see that content through wild turkey DNA.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. Actually, we touched on that a little bit in the last about the hybridization between, because being here in South Florida, you get there's no Osceolas north of this point or that point or that point, and we discussed about seeing different characteristics up to the north, and it's pretty interesting stuff.
Potential of an Osceola breeding a hen and an Eastern also breeding the same hen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that whole topic, when you start talking about subspecies, is it can be kind of charged too, because there's there's certain states that want a hunter to come and to harvest a bird from that state, saying that it's whatever subspecies it is, and if it's not genetically pure to that subspecies, is that a problem type of thing. That's one of the issues we're exploring through this project is, how much hybridization is actually occurring. Is the Osceola subspecies even genetically distinct from the Eastern subspecies? What do the Western populations look like? Like when you go out west and you are harvesting a bird in a state where 2 or 3 different subspecies were translocated into that state 30 or 40 years ago during restoration. What does that look like now? Are the birds hybrids, or are they still genetically pure to the subspecies where they came from? And does that even matter? And so that's some things, among other things, that we're exploring through this project.
That's the guy's chasing that slam.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Chamberlain, thanks a bunch for coming on. Like I said, with the exception of that little oops that we had to begin with, blame technology. But, man, we appreciate the heck out of it. And, we normally release a lot of shorts and reels leading up to the podcast, so we'll make sure we tag in everything. Thanks a bunch. We really enjoyed the conversation, and, hope you continue doing what you're doing and have a great rest of your season. Oh, and I had one more question before we go, if you don't mind. When you go back to Africa, what's your target species going to be?
I don't really have much left to hunt. Unless the only species that I have not hunted and shot are a few of the tiny 10, and dangerous game. Pretty much everything else I've hunted, unless, you start talking Tanzania and some of the places at Zambia that I haven't been. So this is a God's honest truth. I've promised my wife that if I went back, that I would have a very, very modest list, and that it would be small critters. So because I don't have any place to put any more animals, and I, as you can see, I'm a fan of taxidermy, right? And so the thought of going over there and harvesting some of these plains game species that are so beautiful, and not being able to mount the animal and enjoy it and reflect on it is just not palatable to me. So I've also told her that I would not bring any more backskins home, which are littering the floor of my office. And yeah, so to your question, the short answer to your question is I don't know if I'll go back. But if I do, it will be a very short trophy list. Very, very short.
Well, those little guys aren't necessarily cheap. I've chased, so I've only got one left, and that's the Sharps Grysbok. I've got all the rest of them, and I've made 2 consecutive trips without harvesting it, and not to mention the permits for some of the other ones, the Sunni, the Red, the Orby. Man, that when I first started, it was with a Steenbuck in Limpopo, over a dozen years ago, and boy, did I open Pandora's box with that.
Yeah, and I've only opportunistically shot the smaller one, Steenbuck and Klipspringer, just encounter them and they're really cool and decide to harvest them. But I would have to, if I were going to go down that road, to your point, I would have to take the deep dive, and it would not be a simple nor a cheap dive. And again, I've promised my wife that that I would not do that. So I can't continue to behave the way I behave during the spring and then still and then still make another ask when it comes to Africa. So I'm going to have to pick my poison for the next, for the foreseeable future, because I'm really largely absent during the spring, and not just physically, but mentally. And it's because I love what I do. I love my job most times, and I love to hunt turkeys, and I love to be around turkey hunters. And so I travel a lot. And when I'm home, I'm exhausted. I'm brain dead. I haven't slept well in weeks, and I haven't eaten well. And so I'm not present. So I try to take care of her as much as I can before, and particularly after. And going back to Africa, which, as you know, would be right about that, right after that turkey season time. Man, that's a tough sell for mine.
May and June, right around the corner.
Exactly. June. Yeah.
All right, Doc. Well, man, we appreciate it a bunch. Thanks for spending time with us today. And, man, I look forward to talking to you again.
For sure. It's good talking to you guys.
Thank you, sir. Have a good evening.